This is the second of two webinars we're having about our new 3-year strategy. And I was on the board 3.5 years ago when we drew up the first webinar, the first strategy, and I've been chair for nearly 3 years. And that was an entirely internal exercise. And so with John's guidance, we're very keen that this year we have as much participation as possible. And we'll say a bit more about that in a few moments. I think that the aim today is to give as much opportunity for you to ask questions as possible. But it won't be your only opportunity. As I say, we'll have others later on in the process. So John and I will talk for about 30 minutes, and then there should be about 30 minutes for questions. But before we start, let me start with what the third bullet point says there, the elephant in the room, which is the proposals for that Silex and the SRA have made for regulatory redelegation. So if we move to the next slide, I wanted to just briefly explain where we are. Because some of you might say, well, is it worth having a 3-year strategy? Will you still be around there? And I think our answer is yes, we do think that we'll still be around there. Now, Silex and the SRA are pressing ahead with proposals to redelegate regulation from us to the SRA. The SRA board met last month and came up with some ideas which they've put to the Silex board, which we understand will meet later this month. That said, we remain firmly opposed to these ideas. I think the key point is, for us, they're not what the regulated community want. We had a very full consultation last year, which showed that 3/4 of people preferred to stay with a specialist regulator. They're also not what we think is compatible with the 2007 Legal Services Act. In short, we think that what's being proposed is unlawful. We are joined in this view by some big players. So the Law Society, in particular, has been very clear that they don't think that the SRA should do what it's proposed. The Justice Select Committee in the last administration said that they thought that the proposals couldn't provide a stable and efficient model if you allowed a representative body like Silex just to shop around for a regulator that they wanted. Tom Hayhoe is the new chair of the Legal Services Consumer Panel, has been very clear that there's no sufficient evidence of consumer benefits. And whatever happens, there will need to be approval by the Legal Services Board to see whether or not it is in the public interest. So there's quite a lot still to go on, which is why we have been very clear throughout this process, which started some 2.5 years ago, that we will continue to get on with the day job of regulating in the public interest. And that's why we're producing a new 3-year strategy, which we will take us forward until 2027. So a few words now about the process and the timetable, which is on the next slide. So the board, which I chair, had a strategy workshop a couple of months ago when we thought, well, what is it that we can hope to achieve? This is the second of 2 webinars. We held a really good one last week where we got some good feedback. Later this week, we're going to have a workshop with the staff. And then towards the end of the month, we'll put some of the ideas that we're putting, John will put to you in a minute, we'll put those in a document which will enable people who weren't able to go to the webinars to give us feedback. And then we hope to publish the new 3-year strategy towards the end of the year. So this is your first opportunity to ask us questions, to give us your views, but it's most certainly not your last opportunity to do so. So starting then with what is the current strategy? What's the current 3-year strategy, which is on the screen before you now. And in effect, we divided it up into 3 broad areas. One is high standards. We are very proud of the standards that we have set for people who we regulate. Silex practitioners provide an excellent service by and large, and that's one of the things I'll talk a bit more about in a second, but we want to maintain those high standards while also innovating, because the world is changing fast, and minimizing the regulatory burden on people who are doing a good job. The second objective we set ourselves was all around consumer empowerment, trying to make it easier for consumers to get the information they need to choose the right lawyer. And that's quite difficult. Most people, as we know, don't actually use lawyers on a day-to-day basis. It can be a once or twice in a lifetime event, very often when people are vulnerable. So that's part of what we've been doing to try and make it easier for consumers to understand what the lawyers are who are out there and how they can be served. And the third objective we set ourselves on equality, diversity and inclusion is really important. As you know, 75% of the people we regulate, Silex fellows, chartered legal executives, are women. 50% didn't go to university. Many people actually qualified later on in their career. And so for us, it's really important that we champion fair access, both for consumers, but also for those who work in the sector. So how did we do on the 3-year strategy? Well, I think in terms of standards, we made quite a lot of progress. The most recent major example is around higher rights of audience. Doesn't apply to that many people who are practitioners, but it's really important for those that it does apply to, that they have the same rights to plead in higher courts as solicitors and barristers. And that was something that we were pleased to get the LSB to agree to, which we drove forward as part of our regulatory work, and which will really come into effect over the next few months. Second area I touch on there is continuing professional development. I think uniquely among legal regulators, we monitor very closely whether people are doing their CPD. We do spot checks. The board looked at a paper a couple of months ago, which we're on the point of publishing, which shows that we audited about 5%. Pretty good story being told by fellows, not such a good story being told by paralegals, student paralegals, advanced paralegals. But we have also done quite a lot of work on ongoing competence. And then the third area there is all around practice rights. And we have got a very good contract with the University of Law, which makes it possible for those fellows who want to gain practice rights to gain them in a efficient, cost-effective way. As it says there, about 140 fellows have applied so far, and that provides a real opportunity for those who want practice rights to be on the same footing as solicitors and barristers. So that's something about standards. If I now move to consumer empowerment, this is a good example where regulators can't act alone. And we have worked very closely with the other regulators, including the SRA and the Bar Standards Board, to develop the Legal Choices website, which provides an excellent introduction for people who don't know where to start. We've also done quite a lot of work on regulatory information service. I think as a regulator, we publish more than most on those people who have disciplinary action taken against them. The third area I just touch on there is transparency. We're in the middle of a consultation, which actually the board is going to consider tomorrow, which will provide even more transparency around prices for all of the 60 or so firms that we regulate. And finally, although it's not entirely to do with, we don't expect many consumers to be reading our board papers, we have been very transparent in publishing more and more, both what we put to the board, but also what the board decisions are. And that's unlike some other organisations, not a million miles from us, where their governance structures are not totally transparent, their board papers are not published in advance, and sometimes even the minutes of boards aren't published. The third area I wanted to touch on then is EDI. And a couple of years ago, we published our first ever EDI strategy, which set out what we could achieve as an employer. And we have a good story to tell among the 50 or so people who work on our regulatory panels, our disciplinary committees, the appeals committee, the board, in terms of diversity. What we could do as a regulator, and again, good story to tell in providing a lot more information than many other regulators about the EDI breakdown of those people against whom we take action. And finally, as a partner, and one of the things that was very clear is that for many people in the regulated community, it's all about progression and the failures to get recognition of the qualifications that you have got. And we're working on that. Second key area, though, is improving the data. And we've done a lot on that. And we have much better data than we've ever had before. The third, as I just mentioned, is all around enforcement activity. But we've also taken steps to try and make it easier for people to practice. So getting rid of rules about how many hours or days you might work and turning those into qualifying experience to make it much easier. So I think to sum up, the 3-year strategy, we believe we've made quite a lot of progress on, but now is a good time for us to reflect and consider where we go forward. And on that point, I'll hand over to John, who will take us through the next slides to set out what our current thinking is.
Okay. Thank you very much, Jonathan. Yeah, so that's the sort of what we've done, and the next piece is where we want to go. The first thing really to sort of set out is that CRL doesn't operate in a vacuum, and we can't develop our strategy in a vacuum. We need to reflect the broader environment in which we operate, and how our strategy helps us deliver our core regulatory purpose and objectives. So this slide really sets out some of the sort of key strategic influences, as we call them, and there may be more you could think of. It's not an exhaustive list, and it'd be interesting to think if there are other influences we need to kind of reflect on. The first one is the Legal Services Board. So most of you will be aware of them, but they're our oversight regulator. They monitor our performance and, importantly, set the policy direction. And they have set out a number of expectations of all the regulators, including reviewing our enforcement activity and how we go about enforcing kind of the discipline side. How we can leverage improvements to access to justice, and also equality, diversity, inclusion, as Jonathan's outlined, and particularly understanding barriers to progression and how we can improve retention in the legal profession. And then there's been quite a lot of coverage around the whole sphere of professionalism, ethics, and the rule of law, or PEARL in shorthand. So this is about regulation ensuring that the rule of law is upheld and there's ethical behaviour. So that relates to things such as misuse of non-disclosure agreements and SLAPs. And then finally, one around technology and innovation, in particular around artificial intelligence, and ensuring the safe use of AI that benefits legal services users, but also can be a use to those offering legal services. And just I'll use this opportunity as a shameless plug. We have another webinar next week on the subject of AI in association with LexisNexis. If you're interested, please join that. The next one is the Ministry of Justice. So really that's sort of code for government. Of course, we've just seen a change of government. Got to work out sort of what their agenda is, but clearly there's some pressing issues to do with the justice system and prisons. So access to justice and the court system are key issues for them. But also the MOJ have consistently been keen to create a diverse and inclusive legal profession, and importantly ensure there is a ready supply of suitably qualified professionals, particularly needed to deal with those backlogs in the courts. Then there's yourselves, the SIX members, and the regulated community. So our consultation last year, which Jonathan referred to, gave a fairly clear indication that the majority of members want independent specialist regulation to continue. Extension of practice rights is important, and also that we support in terms of understanding our expectations as articulated through our standards. Then moving on, we've got the Legal Services Consumer Panel, who sort of act as a proxy for getting the consumer voice, and that's driven quite a lot of our work to date through the current strategy. But that's around providing the information for consumers to make informed choices, but also around trying to address the unmet legal need that currently exists and improving accessibility. So the Legal Services Consumer Panel very much keen on regulators reflecting the consumer voice in all the policy development that they work, and that'll be a theme underpinning our strategy. So we move on to the next slide, please. So the other kind of context are the regulatory objectives that the Legal Services Board sort of sets, and sort of that's sort of the framework in which they and we operate within. So they have 9 regulatory objectives. This includes a recent one relating to economic crime. And as I say, they guide the LSB's oversight of us, and something that we rightfully need to pay due attention to. So many of those objectives are underpinned by statements of policy, which set out the LSB's expectations of regulators. So a good example of that is one on consumer empowerment, where the LSB have clearly set out expectations. They want to see some improvements on that by September of this year, and that's why we've been consulting on changes to our transparency rules. So we need to pay regard to those objectives, as our performance at the end of the day is measured against them. We can just move on to the next slide then. So that's the context. Now, just to turn to how we've gone about developing the strategy. So there are essentially 4 building blocks to any strategy, irrespective of kind of whether you're a regulator like ourselves or a big corporate entity. And I'll take each of those in turn. So the first one is our mission, and that's sometimes referred to as the vision. Then it's the purpose, in terms of what we're there to really do. And then there is the core activities that we're there to deliver in order to achieve our purpose, and achieve our mission. And then there's the values and behaviours that we need, and need to be exhibited by the organisation in order to effectively deliver our objectives. So that's sort of like the foundation in that guides us in terms of what we do and how we deliver it. So if we just move on to the next slide, please. So just to drill down a bit into mission and purpose. So as Jonathan set out, I think we've achieved quite a lot as an organisation, despite obviously a lot of attention being diverted to the Silex proposals. And as somebody still relatively new to the organisation, I've been quite impressed by the progress across such a range of issues for such a compact organisation. So our starting point with the new strategy is not to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but to build on what we've already achieved. And as I mentioned, the framework within which we operate and expectations placed upon us provide a pretty tight sort of framework. So what we're proposing is a kind of new mission statement, which I'll set out here. So our mission is to be a high-performing and responsive regulator that protects consumers' interests through strong evidence-based regulation. And then our purpose is to ensure high standards of professional conduct and competence, protecting the public interest and promoting respect for CRL regulated lawyers, and maintaining the integrity and trust of the legal profession. So at the end, we'll be seeking your views on on that. Interestingly, we had a sort of mission statement previously, which was around delivering forward-looking regulation. So, and we haven't departed too far from that, but we tried to sort of distill it as down as much as we can. And we didn't have a purpose statement, so that's just to sort of be clear. That's what we're there to do. That's what it says on the tin. So if we can move on to the next slide, please. So looking now at our core activities, so mission and purpose, and then, okay, what are we here to do? What do we need to undertake to deliver our purpose and our mission? And essentially, they can be grouped into three broad categories, which are outlined in this diagram. So regulation, learning, and innovation, and they essentially feed into a continuous cycle of improvement. That's the sort of model. So what we learn from our regulatory activity then informs developments, whether that be our own processes and systems, but also our own policies, which then, in theory, should feed into more efficient and effective and targeted regulation. So just briefly, if we go to the next slide, just pack those a bit more. There's a bit of writing on these slides, probably too much, but I'll just briefly summarize. So the regulation strand, so that's essentially the core of what we do. So we set standards. We authorize applicants against those standards. We check ongoing competence against those standards and ongoing compliance in terms of the disciplinary work. And then obviously we take, proportionate action when standards are not met. And there'll be learning from those activities that then may feed into sort of policy and guidance. So learning, that's about using our data to inform our thinking and policy development. So I think a good example of that is the work that Jonathan's outlined that we've done around EDI and looking at the impacts not only of our work, but broader impacts in the community. And that sort of drove some research that we did in collaboration with some other bodies that are not regulators called Beyond Buzzwords to really understand the lived experience with EDI initiatives. There's also the learning from the CPD that we do, and Jonathan says we'll be publishing a report around that, and also learning from complaints as well. So that all feeds into that. And then innovation is the final one. So as I say, using our learning to seek opportunities to improve how we regulate and improve the delivery of legal services. And what comes in there is issues around legal technology, law tech, and AI, and other things as well. So that's sort of core what we're set to do and how we achieve it. So if we just go on to the next slide, conscious of time. So I just want to briefly outline the sort of the real nub of what we're proposing for the next 3-year strategy. So we've identified 4 strategic priorities for the next 3 years, and I'll look at those in turn. So they're standards and public trust, access to justice and consumer empowerment, independence and sustainability, and then finally an authoritative, inclusive and capable organisation. So previously, as Jonathan set out, we've had 3. Now we're just extending it to 4. So on this slide, each sort of the aims and the outcomes of each of those themes is outlined. So we're less into the detail of each of the strategic themes, and I'll come on to that in a moment. But for the first one, standards and public trust. So yeah, our aim is to promote high quality professional practice, and that's through our standards, enabling the individuals and entities that we regulate to meet those standards. So that plays into the guidance and support that we offer. And also supporting those who we regulate to adapt to changes in delivery of legal services that benefit consumers. So that might be the impact of law tech. It's guidance we've issued around social media use, guidance we've issued around professionalism and ethics are good examples of that. So in terms of the outcomes, where we want to be in 3 years' time, quite ambitious, but we want to ensure our standards and policies and guidance help individuals adapt, and that our approach to continuing professional development improves professionalism. And that's a sort of theme that runs through all of the work that we do on that. If I can just move on to the next slide, which is around access to justice and consumer empowerment. So again, this is building on what we've done under the previous strategy around championing fair access to the legal market, and continuing to improve the information available to consumers. So that's through a continuing investment to the Legal Choices website, through the development of what's called the regulatory information system there is, and other dimensions of that is also supporting those members who may wish to set up their own firms, and what we colloquially called the law firm in a box proposals. So that would in turn provide greater choice to consumers and improve diversity as well. And then there's sort of public education piece around consumers as a result of the work we do have an increased understanding of consumer protections available, that they know where to go to remedy if there's something goes wrong, if they want to make a complaint, etc. And that links into sort of transparency work that we do. Third one briefly is around independence and sustainability. So, as we set out at the beginning, we believe, and I hope you'd agree, that independence is critical to effective regulation, and that's critical to underpinning public trust. So we must be able to, as a regulator, to make decisions without fear or favour. So not to worry over our shoulders that our approved regulator may influence us in that regard. So as I say, CRL's consultation last year showed that the majority of Silex members, I think over 3/4, want the existing model of specialist independent regulation to continue. So we will do everything we can to ensure that happens. And there's a number of avenues for us to pursue, and we recognise that the current regulatory arrangements are imperfect, but there are room for improvement, assuming that we don't get a government that wants to change the 2007 Act, but you never know. So one of the key avenues is around the Legal Services Board review of the internal governance rules. So they are the rules that govern how we and the approved regulator relate to one another. So ensuring that we can exercise our powers freely and independently. Another dimension of sustainability is around our financial sustainability, so that we are we're pretty independent, but we are part of the Silex group. But to have sufficient funds to enable us to invest in those areas of our operation which are most important to consumers and yourselves, and that's sort of grounded on having sufficient reserves and financial prudence as well. And then there's a sort of broader lens of sustainability relating to kind of the environmental impacts, the social impacts of what we do. So we have a broader role as an organisation in society, and we know we have a privileged position from which to sort of provide leadership and make a positive impact. So it's thinking around those broader impacts, and that sort of led to our engagement with the London Legal Walk just last month as part of a sort of charity event. And then just finally, if we move on to the next slide, please. Move on. There we go. So this is sort of more of a kind of internal facing objective. It's really about improving ourselves as an organisation. It's fair to say, there has been uncertainty as a result of the Silex proposal, and they've had an impact on the organisation, but I'm pleased to say we're on a more stable footing, and we, our finances are healthy, and we don't have vacancies. So under this, really, it's around improving our resilience as an organisation, as well as our capacity and capability to adapt to changes. So that's looking at where we may need to bring in expertise, where we work collaboratively with other regulators on developments such as AI and professionalism ethics. But it also plays into the work we do around equality, diversity, inclusion. So it's around continuing to use our data to measure impact and chart progress and evaluate effectiveness of what we do. So we'll continue to further develop the EDI reports and work we do. That includes looking at barriers to progression, for example, and then investing in our people as well. So ensuring we provide a supportive and caring environment which develops people, which has equal opportunities for people to develop as well, are kind of key outcomes we hope to get from that strand. So if I just can sort of move on briefly. So that is kind of the intent, where we hope to be. But as I say, we can't operate alone or in a vacuum. CRL is small. There's 23 of us, so we have to leverage the relationships that we have with fellow regulators and other stakeholders. So the delivery of our strategy is dependent on continuing to adopt a collaborative and sort of co-production approach. So good examples of that are work we've done around legal choices and digital exclusion, as well as EDI research. And yourselves are obviously key parts of that audience. We want to involve you in the work we do, and to be open in what we do. So that plays into this transparency work we've done to extend the amount we publish, and to consult appropriately and get engagement at the early stage using webinars, using other technologies to get your involvement. So the main strategy is sort of underpinned by a number of other things, which will include the annual costed corporate plan. So that will set out the detail for each year of how we're going to achieve the strategic aims, and then how we progress towards those outcomes we want to achieve. And then there'll be underpinning strategies as well, such as our EDI strategy and potentially other ones around digital transformation and people. Just really moving very quickly on. So as I say, the fourth sort of pillar of developing a strategy is around the behavioural framework and the values. So what we set out here are our current values. So as part of the strategy development, we will be reviewing those values with our staff. We think it's important that staff sort of drive that and own that, because they're the ones who have to live those values on a day-to-day basis. But we will be seeking your views on whether you think those values, whether you think what you think the values should be that underpin our approach. And it may be those values are perfectly fit for purpose going forward, or there may be some kind of further developments that we want to do on that. So that, in a very quick canter through, is our approach. So now it's your opportunity to ask some questions and input into the strategy as well. And I will mute myself and hand over to Jonathan, who will run us through that. Thank you.
Thank you, John, and thank you for that comprehensive overview. I mean, in a sense, these are questions designed to get the discussion going, but I think Tina has very helpfully already got the discussion going with a really good question about recognition of qualifications. And I think the answer to that is, first, it's a core part of our role that we talk to people to explain what the basis of qualifications are. So we've done a lot of work with lender panels, for instance, in the conveyancing area, to make it clear what the Silex qualification is. I think the second element that I would put into that is all around legal choices. It comes back, I think, to the point that most people, when they're looking for a lawyer, don't understand what is a lawyer, what's a solicitor, what's a barrister, what's a chartered legal executive. And that's why we and the other regulators got together to provide the Legal Choices website as the vehicle for them, consumers starting from scratch, and that then reads back into the list that we publish of people who have the right qualifications. But I think implicit in your question, Tina, is that there's more that can be done. And one of the proposals that we made to the Silex board last year was that we should set up a joint task force to actually do exactly that. How do we make sure that people understand what the qualifications involve? And we said that we would be happy to carve out the resources. And as John said, we haven't got huge resources, we've only got 23 people, but we would actually provide dedicated people to champion the qualifications of chartered legal executives. Now, unfortunately, Silex didn't even respond to that proposal. And I think it's fairly obvious that the SRA aren't going to do it. So that's one of the many reasons why we think it's important that we continue with independent regulation. I think now, John, there's a couple of other ones there which maybe you could have a go at. I mean, I think Tina's second point about the importance of us consulting education providers is a really good one, and that's part of what we were already planning, but we need to bring it out more specifically. John, do you want to answer the question about the local authorities, or is that a bit difficult?
Yeah, I can't give a comprehensive answer on that. But what I should said right at the beginning, what we are doing is noting the questions down, and then we'll be publishing the answers to those questions, so we can provide a more comprehensive response to that question as part of that sort of question response, because it's got a whole range of what we do and don't necessarily have all the subject matter experts to our fingertips. I just want to reflect, another point around the values that Tina's usually raised around customer first, and I sort of agree with that. That's one of the sort of points behind us being saying we want to be a responsive regulator. We recognise that there are instances where our responsiveness could be improved. Part of the kind of impacts of us, moving as a sort of virtual organisation, is that how we manage phone calls. It requires us to sort of take messages and then we respond, but sometimes we can respond sooner. So there's some work we're doing to just improve that. So certainly we need to bear in mind and focus what we do in terms of those who we serve and those who essentially pay the fee that funds us as well.
Okay, so anybody else want to put in some questions? Tina's worked out the Q&A really well, but are there others out there who want to give us some questions? This is sort of virtual silence. One of the questions we got last week, John, was about the future of the. Oh, hang on. There's some new posts that have come in. Michelle. Oh, that's a difficult one. So I think I'll ask John
it. I think that plays into our jurisdiction. Again, I don't know the answer to that sort of accurately. Obviously, we regulate within England and Wales. There are others who are other UK territories, and I think that's something maybe that we would want to further extend sort of that recognition. And that, interestingly, we had a question last time around sort of the broader European piece, and how we kind of relate to professionals who may not be based in the UK, and what we can do to support them. So again, we will take that question away and we'll make sure that that's added to the answers which will be circulated.
Yeah, as John said, one of the things that we will do is we will do a summary of all the questions asked and give answers. So if we can't answer them now, you will get an answer fairly shortly. But coming back then to one of the questions asked last week was about the compensation arrangements and were they going to change, John?
Yes. So we continue to sort of underpin that. One of the issues that's existed with the uncertainty is around having that fund sort of underwritten by an insurance. So I think since 2021, that fund has been sort of underwritten by ourselves and Silex. So firms are still required to make contributions to that fund, and we've confirmed to the LSB that arrangement will continue until 2025, until there is some greater kind of certainty around that. And I think sort of more broadly, the LSB have sort of shown interest around compensation arrangements and how money's held and all of that in relation to the SRA and some of the issues there, Axiom Ints. So I think we can anticipate the LSB taking a close make a close eye on this particular area.
I just wanted to go back to one of Tina's earlier questions about the emphasis on practitioners, because it's one that we very much agree with. I rather ran through it very quickly, but one of the things that we are very proud of is that we have practitioners involved at every level of the organisation. So we have 2 experienced Silex practitioners who are on the board. The board is 5 strong, 3 lay people and 2 practitioners. One of them is an entity owner. We then have practitioners involved at every level on our strategic risk committee, on our disciplinary panels, on our appeal panels. And we think that's really important, that that practitioner engagement and involvement goes through the organisation like Blackpool and a stick of rock. And it's one of the things that we think that will be lost if the SRA were to take over, because the SRA have made it perfectly clear that they're not getting practitioners involved. They're going to rely on their own staff to do all this work, and that there should be no independent right of appeal to people who've actually worked in the sector. So I just throw that out because it's one of the many weaknesses we think with what is being put forward by the SRA. Any other issues that people want to raise at this stage?
I was just going to, we've got the questions there, and even if it's just a very short response, not even a question, but to get a sense of, do you think those proposed strategic priorities, are we in the right ballpark there? Do you think we've missed the mark there, or things we need to I know Tina's added some suggestions around that, and that's really helpful. And of course, there will be an opportunity to look at this in a bit more detail. I appreciate your coming to this call, but just as that instinctively, do you think mission and purpose is that about right? And about the strategic priorities as well. So maybe a yay or a maybe or a wait and see. That'd just be helpful to give us an immediate sort of feel. And that's probably put the team in a tailspin because I'll need to publish those.
And whilst you're thinking about that, I think the point about what does success look like would also be quite good to get your views on. I think success, one clear element of success is that the Silex practitioner qualification is fully recognised across both central government and in the private sector. I think that's one. But what are the other success criteria that you'd like us to think about? You don't have to answer now, but if you've got views later, that would be great.
I see. I think Charlotte is saying she helpfully agrees with Tina's comments, and you think that Silex should remain independent as a regulator, as well as continuing to promote Silex lawyers to gain more recognition, and makes the important point not that we're seen as same as solicitors. I think the mission and purpose is in the right direction, so that's really helpful feedback. Thank you, Charlotte. And I think one of the key success outcomes is that CRL still exists and able to do what it does.
And then I think Patricia has put in one that as an entity owner, more members being able to set up their own entity, and that's really helpful because one of the things that I found most dispiriting about the last 2.5 years is that we had been doing a lot of work to make it easier for people to set up companies, what we call CRL, law firm in a box, and we've had to put that on the back burner until the current dispute is settled. But I do think that it is one of our advantages, given the membership of the Silex regulated community, is to get more people from that community setting up businesses, and it also feeds back into people who use services. There's a lot of evidence that the Legal Services Consumer Panel has put forward that people from certain backgrounds are reluctant to approach solicitors, where they're very happy to approach people who look and sound like them. And that's one of the things that we will certainly be putting in our 3-year strategy, is that once we've dealt with the current what I call the constitutional soap opera, and we can get back to our core business, we will get back to promoting Law Firm in a Box. But I think some new posts have come in as well, John.
Yeah, so point around there being need for more equal treatment against other lawyers, better pay. I guess that does sort of beg an important question as to what's within our gift as a regulator, and what may be actually what you'd be looking for from the sort of representative body, but certainly around parity, recognition of the qualifications, and things like that runs sort of central to what we do, certainly. But I can't necessarily guarantee better pay, unfortunately.
But I think the pay comes from the understanding of what the qualification involves, and the more that we can get those messages across, I think the better. Yeah. But the idea that, as actually Emma Davis has said, that if there's a redelegation to the SRA, every legal executive will be paid the same as solicitors, is quite frankly ridiculous. I'm sorry to say, be so blunt, but it's not going to happen. What will happen is that you need to undergo patient explanation of what underlies the different qualifications. Yeah. Good. Well, I think we've more or less come to the end of all the comments. Thank you for your contributions. As both John and I said, this is not the end of the process. This is the start of the process. We will hope to issue a sort of fuller consultation, which will then give you another opportunity to feed in your views. And then we'll pull all of that together in the early autumn, and then come back with the next 3-year strategy. The other main thing to look out for is that we will be publishing our consultation on next year's practicing fee certificate. The board is meeting tomorrow. It's going to look at that, and we hope to get that out in the next 2 or 3 weeks. So again, do give us your views. John, any final comments?
No, thanks, Jonathan, but really grateful for your engagement today, and for your comments, and then I look forward to further engagement as we go forward with this. It's been really worthwhile, so thank you.
Okay, thanks for your time.
You can get to your tea now. Yeah.
Well, you can get to your tea. You can go outside into the rain if you're living anywhere near Oxfordshire. Okay, all the best.
Right.
Bye.
Goodbye.